And welcome, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out with you, another Appraiser Coach podcast. Thanks for joining us, folks, and thanks for spreading the word. Appreciate you reaching out to your friends and cohorts across the nation. As appraisers, we're here to learn more. We're here to grow together, and that's what this show today is all about as well. Before I welcome our guest, I want to remind you that we are sponsored by Alamode Software. Alamode, of course, the leader in the appraisal software realm. They have been for years and years and years. In fact, they've been providing great appraisal software for over 30 years. Find out more by going to alamode.com/free trial. Once again, it is alamode.com/free trial. We're also sponsored by DataMaster. DataMaster is also offering 2 weeks unlimited downloads. Check them out. Folks, you've heard people talk about DataMaster. Find out what they're all about without any obligation. Go to datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. Once again, it's datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. And finally, we are sponsored by OREP Insurance. OREP is the insurance that I use for my E&O needs, and you should as well. Check them out at orep.org. That's OREP, OREP.org. Well, folks, we have had on this program several times. I keep asking him back because he's a terribly interesting guy, and we always have interesting things to talk about. I should pause here before I introduce him and just say, my goal with the Appraiser Coach podcast is to help appraisers to be better business owners. Of course, part of that is also being better appraisers. It's not my main focus, but I know it's terribly important, and I know that appraisers are tuning in to these types of shows that help them to be better appraisers, and that's what we're going to be talking about today with Mr. Tim Andersen. Welcome, Tim.
Dustin, thank you. It's great to be with you again. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, you've been on several shows, and I hope people will go back and look at some of those other shows because they've all been interesting as far as helping us to become better appraisers. Tim comes highly qualified to talk about what we're going to be talking about today and some of the other topics that we've gone over with him. He is an MAI. He is a USPAP instructor. He's a longtime appraiser in the state of Florida. He's a very smart guy. By the way, he's also available for consulting as well. If you need some help with individual problems, issues, ideas, different things that he can help you out with. One of the great things about Tim is he understands what appraisers are up against when they get taken before their state board. So if you've got, one of those warning letters, if you've got an inquiry going on with a state board, he's the guy to get a hold of. You can reach him at 561-635-5265, or you can email him at maitca at bellsouth.net, and he would love to help you out. So welcome again, Tim. Appreciate it. Why don't you introduce the topic today?
Well, Dustin, looking at the websites of various state appraisal boards, it's becoming more and more clear that appraisers are not understanding, are not using properly, are not developing properly, are not reporting properly the concept of highest and best use. And because highest and best use is such an important part of the analytics of an appraisal, I thought that we might spend a little time on it today and bring to the fore some of the areas that appraisers need to be aware of.
Well, Tim, I have to push back a little bit right up front here because, it's just a box. I check the box. In fact, I don't even check it. Usually it's already checked for me because the template already has the highest and best use as the yes box marked. So, I'm not sure why you're making such a big deal out of this.
Well, okay. In that case, let's talk about skiing. We're done.
I have a few things to say about that, don't I?
Dustin, you're right. It is a box to check. Unfortunately, however, because of the, may I be completely frank when I talk about the patty maker form, Dustin, it's stupid. And it doesn't give the appraiser, first of all, it's designed, in my opinion, to flummox the appraiser. To say the highest and best use of the property is always what's there is probably right most of the time, frankly.
Okay.
But the issue is, USPAP says the appraiser will not only develop an opinion of highest and best use, but the appraiser will report the opinion of highest and best use. And the language of Standard Rule 2-2A10 specifically says that within the within the body, within the narrative of the report itself, the appraiser will summarize the logic and rationale behind the highest and best use conclusion. So while, yes, checking a box is certainly not wrong, and it is checked for you in most software, what appraisers omit is the discussion of the logic and the rationale behind the highest and best use conclusion. In other words, the appraiser explains what the highest and best use is, but does not explain why it's the highest and best use.
You know why I like you, Tim? You know why I like you? You know, when you sit there and just rattle off these numbers like they just come off the top of your head, they just, man, I'm impressed. It reminds me of the old show Police Academy, and it seems like there was a character on there that not only knew every law, but they knew every statute number and would rattle it off just like it was nothing. It's impressive.
Well, Dustin, you know the old saying that 83.7% of statistics are made up on the spot. So.
Very good. Let's start here, Tim. I think you made a good point. You know, sometimes we get in this mode as appraisers, or we're tempted to get in this mode of appraisers of just, you know, routine. And sometimes we don't pause. Would you agree or disagree with this statement? The highest and best use could be the most important part or the most important step in an appraisal.
Dustin, I agree with it insofar as it goes. I would have to carry it further, however. I would have to say that it is the most important step in the appraisal, because unless you determine what the highest and best use of the subject is via the analytical process, then you don't know where to go for value and you don't know how to choose comps. Most appraisers don't understand that the definition of a comparable sale is not where it's located, is not when it's sold, is not how big it is, etc. The definition of a comparable sale is it has the same highest and best use as the subject.
Okay.
And if you haven't done those analyses, you cannot determine what the highest and best use of the subject is, nor can you determine if the highest and best use of the comps is the same as the subject.
I've used this analogy, and correct me if this analogy is way off, but I've used the analogy of coming up to a fork in the road, and, you know, we constantly take the right side. We just, you know, by nature, by habit, by tradition, we take the right side. And I liken that to marking the yes box on the highest and best use. Most of the time that, you know, taking the right turn probably is okay, probably is right, probably is correct. But if the right turn is actually left, and by right, I mean the correct turn is actually left, and we by force of habit get off on the right side, we make the right turn, if you will, turn to the right hand. I want to make sure, you know, my dad used to always tell me, you know, take the other left, your other left. The point is if we're supposed to go one way and by habit we go the other way, that changes everything, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about then. Let's start with the definition. Let's start very 101 here. Highest and best use 101. What is highest and best use? What's your definition of highest and best use, Tim?
Well, the highest and best use, Dustin, is a hierarchical concept that a parcel of real estate is at its most valuable when its use produces the most income or participates in the production of the greatest potential profit. Now, for the typical residential appraiser, they say, well, fine, the house doesn't produce any income and there's no profit involved. Granted, there isn't typically, unless it's new construction.
Right.
But you have to remember that there was a time when that house was new and somebody built it to sell it.
Okay.
So as a result, if somebody didn't build it to its highest and best use, they either lost money or they left money on the table. So when we're looking at highest and best use, what we're saying is the land utilized properly? Is the house congruent with other houses in the area? In other words, if you have a neighborhood full of 1,500 square foot ranch-style houses, and somebody decides to build on a lot a 5,000 square foot geodesic dome, there may be some problems selling the geodesic dome.
No, there would be. It's not me.
It doesn't work in that particular neighborhood. Okay,
so you use the word hierarchical, and by fear of getting too technical, describe what you mean by I can't even say it.
There's a hierarchy in highest and best use. And basically, highest and best use is the use has to be legal, it has to be physically possible, it has to be financially feasible, And then of the financially feasible uses, it has to be the use that brings the highest value or the highest potential profit. So when we talk about hierarchical, what we're saying is you start off with one. Let's use legal. Okay, it's a residentially zoned neighborhood. Well, that means that commercial uses, retail uses, agricultural uses, industrial uses, etc., are not allowed because they're not legal. The only legal use is a residential use.
Okay.
Now, the next part of the hierarchy is it physically possible? Now, for example, you can have a 10,000 square foot lot. Well, it's 10,000 square foot lot. Now, you can put a lot of house on a 10,000 square foot lot, but you can't put a 12,000 square foot one-story house on a 10,000 square foot lot, as much as you might want to. Therefore, that is not a physically possible use. So once you've eliminated uses that are not legal, once you've eliminated uses that are not physically possible, then you're starting to look at the uses that are financially feasible.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. I have been taught that legality is probably the first test to do. Would you agree, and why or why not?
Okay. If you get deeply into the literature, you'll find out that some authorities say legality is the first test. Some authorities say physically possible is the first test. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
If you read the 14th edition of the Appraisal of Real Estate, once you get into it, it says basically the same thing.
Okay.
So you can do legal or physically possible or legal. That doesn't make any difference.
Okay. So but when we're talking about legal, are we talking about zoning here?
Typically, yes. Now, in places like Houston that don't have zoning, you're looking at things like deed restrictions or neighborhood norms, stuff like that. But typically, you're looking at zoning and land use, yes.
Okay. So this is a question I've always had, Tim, and I think many of my listeners will have this as well. I ran into a situation, it was about half a year ago. I was in Jackson Hole, downtown, and the individual had purchased a home recently. He was in the process of renovating it, obviously was trying to make it a multifamily unit. He bought it as a single family. He was in the process of renovating, and of course, he wanted it appraised as a multifamily. Well, it wasn't legal as a multifamily. It was a single-family property, zoned single-family, but his comment to me was the chances of this moving to a zoning that is multifamily is pretty much in the bag, okay? In other words, he was in the process of changing that zoning in that area, and he went on to describe all of the meetings he went to, and it's just a matter of, there's a vote that's going to occur, and it's going to happen very soon. Currently, effective date-wise, he was zoned single-family, but he was very clear, and I think pretty convincing, that that zoning was going to change to multifamily. What's an appraiser to do in that situation?
Well, Dustin, in that particular situation, the appraiser would have to get a hold of the zoning authorities and then specifically ask, is this zoning change in the bag? And if they go, yeah, he's got to fill out a couple more forms and send in some more money, but yeah, it's probably going to go through, then it would be okay to appraise it as if the zoning had either gone through or was going to go through. Use an extraordinary assumption or a hypothetical condition. Whereas if the good zoning folks in Jackson Hole said there's going to be 80-degree temperatures in January here in Jackson Hole before that zoning goes through, then you would be ill-advised to appraise it as if it were a multifamily property, because not only is it not a multifamily property, but a reasonable authority just told you that it wouldn't be a multifamily property.
Okay. In that situation, would you click the hypothetical box?
Dustin, in that particular case, I would thank that particular client profusely and walk away.
Smart guy. Okay. Enough said. Okay. After legality, then what?
Okay. We got legality. We got a reasonably probable use. Then we get into a financially feasible use. Let's back up to reasonably probable use. And let's use the example of this particular job you had in Jackson Hole.
Okay.
It was not reasonably, let me rephrase. It might have been reasonably possible that the zoning was going to change, but the appraiser would have to verify that. And the appraiser would have to verify that with someone other than the borrower.
That was good enough just to talk to the guy that was making the changes? Come on.
Well, that guy, and then maybe the bellhop at the hotel. They know everything.
Sure.
So assuming it would go through, then, Dustin, the appraiser is looking at financial feasibility. Now, you were dealing with a brand new property. So what would happen is the appraiser would, to determine financial feasibility, the appraiser would sit down with an Excel spreadsheet, and the appraiser would say, okay, I'm going to do a sensitivity analysis, and it's going to cost this much to build it, and the land is worth this much, and it's going to take this long to build it, and it's going to be a X quality and Y condition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The appraiser is going to look at all the variables. The appraiser is going to, in effect, play with it to see which combination of variables is going to bring the highest value without any more than typical risk. Okay. And that set of variables that brings the highest value, still within an acceptable level of risk, is by definition the highest and best use.
Okay. Maybe let's step outside for just a second and look at this from the outside in. Whenever I'm describing highest and best use to a borrower, for example, not that it happens a lot, but in a situation where it's questionable, I sometimes describe for them why highest and best use is such a big deal. I guess maybe that's my question, Tim. Why is highest and best use such a big deal? Why can't we just appraise what's there? Why can't we just, hey, there's a dentist office here. I'm going to appraise it as a dentist office. There's a single family residence here. I'm going to appraise it as a single family residence. Why the highest and best use tests?
Dustin, let's go back to your basic house, basic residential house. You're in a residential neighborhood. The house is a residential house. It's the typical size of the neighborhood. It looks like most every other house in the neighborhood. It's in average condition. It's more or less the same age. There's nothing wrong with the structure of the house. There's nothing wrong with the site itself. It's your basic plain vanilla house in a neighborhood full of basic plain vanilla houses. Mm-hmm. Chances are, Dustin, your highest and best use analysis is going to be exactly what I just said. I got a house. It's on a residential lot. It's residentially zoned in a residential neighborhood. Nobody's buying houses to tear them down and do something else with them. Nobody's buying houses to reconfigure them into boarding houses. It's a single family residence. There's the highest and best use analysis right there, quite frankly.
Right.
However, when somebody said, for example, let me give you a story here in Florida. I appraised a house once. The house itself faced south. Okay. The house, when it was built, did not have a patio. Now, the owner decided that he wanted a patio on his south-facing house. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Excuse me, let me be more clear on a patio. It was a covered patio to be part of the living area of the house.
Okay, like a sun.
Concrete slab. I'm sorry, I should have made that more clear.
That's fine, okay. All
right. So what he did was he knocked out the back wall of his house. He expanded the house, beautiful south-facing enclosed patio. Unfortunately, because it faced south and because he built it entirely out of plexiglass.
Nice, cool.
He had sun on that patio from the second the sun came up until the second the sun went down.
Well, it's a good thing he's in Florida where the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah, and it's cold in the winter. So basically what he did was build himself a hothouse.
Yeah, yes, he did.
And when I say hothouse, I mean hot house. And the air conditioning in the house was not big enough to cool this area. So he tried drilling through the plexiglass with a saw so he could hang a window air conditioning unit. And of course it ruined the plexiglass, which means water got in, which means it was moldy and mildewy, and it was just awful. So basically, in my report back to my client, I said, the highest and best use of this property is not this house. The patio itself, the covered patio itself, is almost uninhabitable. So I gave it no credit. I said it was a 1,200 square foot house, sure, not an 1,800 square foot house. Well, of course, the homeowner's all upset. He's threatening to sue. And my client's all upset because it's trying to acquire this property for eminent domain. and blah, 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 blah. Well, as it worked out, my client did not get this particular property and had to make other plans. But that particular house, the highest and best use of the site was not what it was. It was to tear that hot house down, reseal up the back of the house, and have a 1,200 square foot house in a neighborhood full of 1,000 to 1,400 square foot houses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So what you're describing to me doesn't sound terribly difficult. I mean, as appraisers, I wouldn't say that the highest and best use is rocket science, right?
Typically, it's not rocket science until you have to get into the deep analyses of what to do with a vacant site.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for example, let's suppose, okay, up in rural Utah, there are, excuse me, I'm sorry, I just blasphemed. I apologize. Up in rural Idaho.
Thank you.
I was going to use an example of the highest and best use. I was going to use the example of a martini glass, but nobody in Utah would know what that was.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you need
I can't do that. Okay. Suppose you have a vacation community up in the panhandle of Idaho, and there are numerous vacation homes up there. And they're all on 6,000 to 7,000 square foot lots. They're 900,000 square feet. They were built back in the 60s, etc. And they're just a place to go on the weekends, a place to spend a couple of weeks in the summer. Okay.
Sure.
Well, somebody comes along and buys up 10 of those lots and tears all those houses down and builds a 9,000 square foot mansion. Mm-hmm. And then spends $800,000, $900,000 just on construction costs, and lists it for $1.2 million with some high-powered Beverly Hills real estate broker. Now, it's all over the internet. Flyers are sent out everywhere. The Hollywood types are flying in, looking at it, so on and so forth. But really, honestly, Dustin, given no more than what I told you, in a neighborhood of houses that are typically 1,000 square feet or less, in a neighborhood where the typical house is 45 plus years old, in the neighborhood where the typical house is a second vacation home, really, what's the probability that that house is going to sell for $1.1 million, $1.2 million?
Right. I hear you. Okay.
So the point is, somebody didn't do their highest and best use. And if you got that assignment, you would have to say that the highest and best use of the property, as if it were vacant, would be to build something compatible with the neighborhood. And then you'd have to say the highest and best use of the subject as improved isn't what's there, because what's there isn't going to sell for that price.
Okay.
We get back to the profit motive. If you can't build it and sell it and make a profit, why build it?
Right. Okay.
Therefore, it ain't the highest and best use.
I think I understand where you're coming from, and I just want to drill down just a little bit, because you said something that reminded me of a class that I took 20 plus years ago. This was one of my first appraisal classes ever. I don't know if it was methodologies, probably methodologies. And we're talking about highest and best use. And this little guy in the back of my head, who was my instructor, told me something to the effect of, when you're looking at highest and best use, you're not necessarily looking at least one of the tests of highest and best use, you're not necessarily looking at what's there. You're pretending as if it's vacant.
Right.
Explain that to us.
Okay. Well, any site can be made vacant. You bring a bulldozer in, scrape it clean up, and away you go.
I mean, there's a house.
Yeah, that takes 2 hours.
Okay.
So highest and best use applies both to the site as if vacant, as well as to the current improvements. Now, most sites aren't vacant; they're improved. Okay, then don't worry about the site as if vacant, unless it's obvious that the site is misused. For example, let's go back to the vacation home up in the Idaho Panhandle. Somebody buys 8 lots, scrapes them, and builds a 1,200 square foot house on the site that's now an acre and a quarter. Okay, fine, that's their choice. They have every right to do that. But you and I, as analysts, as real property analysts, are going to say, okay, that's fine, it's your property. But this isn't the highest and best use of the property. The highest and best use is 8 lots with maybe about 1,000 square foot house on each one.
Okay. Again, it doesn't seem that difficult, doesn't seem that challenging. I wonder if, Tim, if that's the problem. I wonder,
No,
at least one of the problems. That's
not the problem. Number one, the problem is, remember we talked earlier, there was not only the box that you checked on page 1. Number two, because that is the only space that even mentions the term highest and best use, most appraisers stop at checking the box.
right.
But yet, if you look at both Standard Rule 1-3B, I think it is, Standard Rule 1-3B says if you're appraising to the standard of market value, when it's necessary for credible assignment results, you will come up with a conclusion as to highest and best use, having gone through that analytical process that we spoke about a few minutes earlier. Then, according to Standard 2-2A10, I think, you will, somewhere in the report, summarize the logic and rationale behind your conclusion.
Okay.
So you have got to say things like, I shook my chicken bones and consulted my snake entrails, and because of the zoning, because of the surrounding land uses, blah, 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 I concluded that the highest and best use of the site as improved is its present improvements.
Do you actually use snake bones in your report?
It's the chicken entrails, snake bone. Yeah.
Okay, good. Just want to clarify. All right, let's talk for a second about, let's get back to basics for a second again. Highest and best use.
Right, the two words are superlatives. And I remember an appraiser coming to me with a problem, and he didn't know where to go for comps. I said, well, what's the highest and best use? And he said, well, it's commercial. I said, well, great. What commercial? Is it an auto dealership? Is it an office building? Is it a restaurant? Is it a bank? Is it a doctor's office? What's the highest and best use? And his response is, well, what difference does it make? Well, it makes a big difference. For example, let's talk about a doctor's office. I think most every appraiser who's ever appraised a doctor's office finds out very quickly that doctors will pay a lot of money for an office that they're going to own, but yet they're not really excited about paying all that much in rent for an office that they're merely going to rent. So part of the analysis, somebody wants to build a medical center. Part of the appraiser's analysis is, okay, you're going to build a medical center. Are you going to sell the individual suites in fee simple, or are you going to maintain it as a rental property? That's part of the analysis. That's part of determining which is going to bring the highest value. And while that's completely incongruent with the definition of market value, that's not where we're going today.
Okay. I want to, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about this problem that I constantly find myself in. And that is, I'll just throw it out there so you can be thinking about it while we're talking about some sponsors here. The problem I run into is a residential only appraiser. I'm a certified residential. I am not a certified general. I'm not an MAI. I am not a commercial guy in any stretch of the imagination. Don't claim to be, don't pretend to be one on TV. The problem I see often is I think bouncing off of what you just said. I know enough to say the highest and best use of this property is not residential. I would even maybe know enough to say that the highest and best use of this property is commercial. But then to go into the details as to how or what type of commercial we're talking about, that's where I run into a problem. One thing you're not going to do, folks, is run into a problem with your software if you're using a la mode. A la mode software has been the leader for over 30 years in the appraisal software community. Folks, you can use other software out there. Great software out there available. If you want to get appraisals done, pretty much any software will work. If you want to be efficient, if you want to be effective, if you want to do things smarter rather than harder, you're going to want to try a la mode. In fact, you're going to want to use a la mode. But if you want to just try them for a couple of weeks just to find out if they are for you, go to alamode.com/free trial. You can call them 800 a la mode. Folks, they have the best technical support in the appraisal software world. Check them out. Get it set up. Try out their bells, try out their whistles, try out their effective tools, and I guarantee you won't go back. Again, it's alamode.com/free trial or 800 a la mode. Been talking to the guys over at DataMaster for the last little while. Tim talked about Utah. They are out of Utah. They're a small company. When I say small company, they're a company you can talk to. They're a company that there's just a few faces running a great big company that is doing great things for appraisers across the nation. I love that about Data Master. They're very small town, if you will. They're people you can pick up the phone and call and talk to, and they are doing great things for appraisers because they're allowing you to work more efficiently. Forget all of that data entry that you've either been doing yourself or you've been paying someone else to do. These days, folks, it's all about doing things quicker without cutting on your quality. That's what Data Master will do for you. You can check them out for 14 days. If they're in your area, go to datamasterfreetrial.com/coach, datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. You can try out what they will do for you. I guarantee they're going to save you at least 30 minutes per report, probably over an hour per report. Who doesn't want that, folks? Check them out. Again, datamasterfreetrial.com/coach for more information. And finally, we are sponsored by OREP Insurance. I'm in the process of renewing my OREP, my E&O, and I'm doing it through OREP. For the last 2 years I've been with OREP. Kind of run into an interesting situation this last year. My volume went way up in 2016, which is a good thing. But on the E&O side, it may not necessarily be such a good thing. And I'll tell you what I love about OREP. They did not just quote me. They are shopping around. They are finding the best quote for me. They're going back and forth. They're trying to qualify and find out a little bit more about how I work differently than my peers. I love that about a company who will actually pick up the phone or send you an email and actually talk to you about what's going on. That's what you find with OREP Insurance. If you're with any other E&O insurance, folks, at least check them out. Go to orep.org, find out the benefits that they have, and consider switching your E&O this year to OREP. Once again, it's orep.org. And we are back, folks. We're talking with Tim Andersen out of Florida. He's an MAI. He's a USPAP instructor, very highly qualified to talk about this subject today. We're talking about highest and best use. Welcome back to the program, Tim.
Hi, Dustin. Thank you. It's good to be back.
So we were talking a little bit about this whole highest and best use thing with regard to residential. And sometimes I feel a little bit squeamish as I pull up to a property and realize that maybe it's a mixed use zoning, or maybe it is zoned commercial, but residential is allowed. And so we're doing this whole highest and best use analysis. And sometimes I think, well, I certainly understand what the value is on the residential side, but I'm not really qualified on the commercial side. So how does a residential guy do a highest and best use?
Dustin, a residential guy is going to do a highest and best use, assuming the property is residential. If the residential guy is not sure what the highest and best use is, then the residential guy has either got to withdraw from the assignment or somehow get with somebody who knows how to go through the process.
Yeah. And this is a great place to pause and encourage appraisers to develop some type of relationship with the commercial individuals in your area. I have that relationship with at least 2 appraisers out there. I've reached out to them on multiple occasions for these types of things to be able to get their expertise. I would call that significant assistance and put their name in the report, but at least it allows me to be able to rely on someone else where I may lack some knowledge.
And that's basically what you've got to do. You've either got to leave the assignment or find a way to complete it credibly, which will probably mean bringing in somebody who is licensed at the commercial or the general level and work with him or her to find out the highest and best use of the property.
Okay, so we're talking 4 tests. We've talked about legality. Tell me what we've hit on and what we still need to hit on as far as the tests involved in highest and best use.
Well, we've gone through them. We've got legal, and the highest and best use has to be legal. I remember a number of years ago I was asked to appraise what I was told was a small hotel. So I went over to the hotel, and as it turned out, the owner of the hotel was leasing the rooms, shall we say, rather quickly, and was not really
by the hour, not by the day.
Yeah, well, maybe not even the hour. Anyway, this hotel was throwing off massive amounts of cash. That's all he took. No checks, no credit cards, cash, period. That was it.
I wonder why that is. Weird.
It was under the table. So he's showing me what's going on. I said, look, I'll be happy to appraise your property, but I cannot appraise this as a brothel. I've got to appraise this as a hotel.
Okay.
And he said, okay, all right, do what you got to do. So I appraised it as a hotel. Okay. But the point is, the highest and best use must, by definition, be legal. All right, then the highest and best use must be one that is physically possible or reasonable. In other words, if you've got a vacant lot someplace in a residential neighborhood, you're not going to buy it and put up a pig rendering plant. That just That's just not only is it not legal, it's also not a reasonable use of that site.
Okay.
Then the highest and best use must be financially feasible. In other words, you're not going to build a $500,000 house in the $250,000 neighborhood because you won't sell the house for $500,000. You'll probably sell it for less than your cost of construction. So by definition, that's not the highest and best use. And then finally, the final tier in the hierarchy is the highest and best use is the one use that, as of the effective date of the appraisal, gives the highest value to the land or has the highest profit potential. So those are the four tests. So the first two are rather short, they're rather immediate. The third part of it, the financial feasibility, can become quite complex. And then the fourth tier in the hierarchy is dependent on the other three. In other words, the single use as of the effective date of the appraisal that brings the highest value, at least according to your analyses. Now, somebody else could analyze it differently, but somebody else isn't appraising it. You are.
Right. Okay, good. So let's drill down a little bit, if you don't mind, in the few minutes that we have remaining here. You talked about feasibility, lack of feasibility. You gave a couple of examples. So I guess the question is, do you mean to say that the theory of highest and best use tells me I can't do with my property whatever I want to do with my property?
No, that's what zoning does.
Okay.
That's the government.
Okay.
So the government tells you what you can do with your property. And within those boundaries, you can do anything you want to, even if it's stupid.
Okay. All right. Good. As we go through this process, it seems like it's pretty straightforward, Tim. Why do appraisers have such a challenging, difficult time? And by the way, I'm raising my hand. Sometimes highest and best use can be a bit confusing. Where do we get ourselves stuck?
Well, you said that you took your first appraisal class 25 or so years ago, which means you were a teenager at the time you took it.
Right, exactly. No.
And Dustin, how much time did you spend on highest and best use in that class?
Yeah, probably. If we spent an hour, I'd be shocked.
Right. Have you? And this isn't a criticism; it's just a question. Yeah. Since that time, have you taken a class specifically on the development, the analytical processes, etc., of highest and best use?
One.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So the point is, most appraisers are not trained in highest and best use analysis. It's not that it's difficult. It's that most of us aren't trained in it.
Okay.
When you take the training, when you take a couple of classes in it, you find out that it's more time consuming than difficult.
Okay. Let me follow up on something we said earlier. So as I was introducing you, I talked about the fact that you help appraisers who might get themselves in sticky situations, hot water, if you will, with state boards. And one of the things that I have seen firsthand is that state boards can be a little bit picky on this whole deal about highest and best use. In other words, if an appraiser marks the box, but then does not explain the process, it's true that they can get themselves in some hot water.
Dustin, there was a little glitch in the transmission. I didn't hear your question.
Sure. The question is, if an appraiser takes the time to mark the box, and let's say they really do the analysis, if they don't explain that process, can they get themselves in trouble with the state boards?
Yes, and it's simply because USPAP says you will at least summarize the logic and rationale behind your highest and best use conclusion. Okay. Now, that does not mean it's got to go on for 15 pages. It might be a paragraph. It cannot be boilerplate. If you have highest and best use boilerplate in your pre-printed software, look at it very carefully. Okay. Chances are all it contains is the definition of highest and best use. It does not explain the process or the processes through which you went to develop your highest and best use conclusion. And if you check the box, that implies you've gone through those analyses. If you merely use the pre-printed software and nothing else, then that could be construed as misleading. And it's misleading because why did you choose not to explain your analyses? Did you not go through them?
Does it matter whether it's in the report or in the work file?
It should be in the report. It must be in the work file.
Okay. So what you're saying then is the highest and best use analysis or the description is limited to those two things: the checkbox, and the description of what you did, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. Let's recap. Okay, let's if you don't mind, as we wrap up here, in a nutshell, what does the average appraiser need to be aware of in regard to highest and best use?
Well, it needs to be aware of the definition, the four parts of it. Needs to be aware that a comparable is not a comparable unless and until the appraiser can demonstrate that it has the same highest and best use as does the subject. Now, let's
put a pin. Let's put a pin in that because I want to come back to that. I want you to finish up your summary, and then I want to come back to that because I think that probably deserves a little bit of attention. Keep going.
Okay. Let's see. We talked about the 4 points. We talked about the comparable sales. The appraiser needs to make sure that not only is the box checked, which is basically USPAP Standard Rule 1-3B, but then there is that narrative, and again, it does not be long. It probably shouldn't be long. It should be succinct. And that's in USPAP Standard Rule 2-2A10. And then the appraiser needs to make sure that it's clear what the appraiser did and very possibly didn't do to arrive at highest and best use. Typically, that's not going to apply for your standard residential mortgage appraisal. But for something like eminent domain, yeah, it would apply. And then again, we get back to the point that the appraiser has to go through all of these analyses, basically before coming up with a value conclusion.
Okay. I want to back up to two things. One of them I put a pin in earlier. The other one I want to talk to, well, the other one's shorter. So let's deal with that one first. You talk about the description and you mentioned, you should not just rely on the boilerplate. And you specifically said, if your software has something in there, you probably ought to read it, make sure that it's not just a definition. What about boilerplate in this sense? We talked about, hey, 9 times out of 10, if not more, Tim, when I drive up to a property, it's very, very obvious what the highest and best use is. I mean, I'm in a subdivision, tract homes, and my subject is a tract home like everything else. I know what the zoning is. I know what the other analysis is that I need to take a look at. Is there anything wrong, in your opinion, with having some boilerplate in my template that says I performed the highest and best use analysis, and I just have the 4 tests, and I just have a short description of what I did with each of those tests because I did the same. I'm going to do the same thing every single time unless it's not normal, and then I go back to that boilerplate and change it. Anything wrong in your opinion with that?
I would not see anything wrong with that. We use boilerplates to help us save time. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
The only caveat I would put in there is don't get caught up to the point where you're trying to use boilerplate for analysis.
Okay, good.
Okay. Use boilerplate if you're going to repeat something in every appraisal you ever write. Use a boilerplate.
Okay, good.
But make sure you're not using it as a substitute for analysis. Right. Make sure you're not using it to try to hide the fact that you didn't do the analysis.
Right. I've used the example, and the statute of limitations is way past, so I'm okay sharing this example. But back when I was young and dumb, I used the example of getting in trouble with a local bank because I had put that I had measured the property, that I had walked through each room, that I'd taken pictures on the inside, all of this, and of course it was a new construction that wasn't actually on the property yet. So that's an example of writing boilerplate that's right most of the time, but when it's wrong, boy, you better go back and change it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to back up to something you said earlier: comparables. This can be a bit challenging. Especially in rural areas. You talked about working in rural Idaho. Sometimes we don't have a whole lot of choice as to what's sold, what's not sold. Would you say, if I said to you, Tim, that all of your comparables must be the same highest and best use as the subject, true or false?
Okay. In the sentence you have just constructed, it's true.
Okay.
Now, you could reconstruct the sentence where the answer would be true most of the time.
Okay.
Now, there are times, Dustin, obviously in extremely rural areas, there are times when there just aren't any comparable sales. Well, in that case, step 1 is to expand your search radius. Step 2 is to go back in time. And if step 1 doesn't work and step 2 doesn't work, then step 3 is put all the weight on the cost approach.
Okay. Explain that.
And then that's the big part. The big part is explain why.
Okay. Good. That's why I said explain that. Yeah, I mean, we do these things as a appraiser. You and I have talked about it. I think this is, I wouldn't say it's getting to be a broken record, because I think it's important that we hit it over and over and over and over again. It's not so much what you do, it's why you do it. You explain it.
Why you do it. That's in the reconciliation. In the report, we explain what we did and how we did it.
Good.
In the reconciliation, we explain why we did what we did.
Excellent. Tim Andersen, sitting in sunny Florida, thank you very, very much for taking time out of your day to be with us. This stuff is super important, and I hope appraisers listened clear to the end, because this affects our licensing, this affects our quality, this affects what we do as appraisers, which is super important. Thank you, my friend.
Dustin, thank you for having me. My best to your family.
Thank you, and to yours, and can't wait to have you on again, folks. As I have Tim Andersen, I keep having him back on because you are interested in what he has to say. Our numbers go up when Tim comes on. These are important things to talk about, and I appreciate him being on there. Speaking of important things to talk about, folks, we right now are meeting in 6 different locations. I shouldn't say that. 5 different locations, 6 different meetings across the nation as part of the Dream Team Mastermind. The opportunity to come together with other appraisers and to learn more about how to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your appraisal office. Currently, we have at least 1 seat available in each of these dream teams across the nation. I would, by the time you contact me, by the time this airs, that may change, but contact me and find out if you're interested in being a part of a great group that meets quarterly to go over and improve your business. You'll want to be a part of the dream team. It is currently meeting in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Salt Lake City, Dallas, and 2 different groups in the Las Vegas area. So reach out to me at thecoach@theappraisercoach.com. Thank you for joining us, folks. We'll catch you next time.